And ladies and gentlemen, you can go and buy a condensed version of this and in 6 pages get all of the essence of what we have by just getting your digital Cliff Notes.
You don't even have to watch the podcast.
You don't have to.
If you have the right AI, it's going to tell you the bullet points.
You don't have to. In fact, actually, if we do get digitized and in the world of plagiarism, actually anything that we do say that is worthwhile will come up when Gemini does the initial search. And make no reference to us whatsoever.
We're going to get plagiarized. So here's where I want to go with this.
Where do you want to go, Will?
I want to talk a little bit about the academic environment. We spent a lot of time on the economy. But let's talk about in the schools themselves. All right. So, I go to a lot of meetings, and the big fear is nobody's doing their work anymore. Everybody's using artificial intelligence. Everybody's using AI. The kids are putting ChatGPT and it's doing their homework. They're doing all of this. Little dirty secret. Too many professors are building their classes with AI, and I don't know how you look at the student and criticize them when you are doing the exact same thing. Because you're setting the model, right?
There you go. Naughty.
Right? So, all right, when you're crying and then you didn't put your class together until 2 days before the semester and you had AI write your syllabus, maybe you're setting an example for young people. But I want to ask this. And let me be real honest. Look, I could sit here and go, I have 5 degrees, 1 bachelor's and 4 graduate degrees, and I have multiple industry kind of certifications throughout the years. But I didn't do all of it. I wish I could say I did all of that for the joy of knowledge. It had another purpose. Either I needed to get this knowledge for my career, I needed to get this knowledge for my students to pass it along, to fulfill my obligation. There was always a reason, right? But if students have this at their disposal, I would have used it. There is no way in college and high school I wouldn't have used artificial intelligence. I mean, maybe not in grade school, but definitely by then I would have had it. We used to do this thing called dating where it was in person. So I would have had a date. I would have had a homework assignment. And I would have said, well, I need to get this done. Maybe my parents were like, you're not going out till this is done if I was in high school. I would have found my way to this stuff. You wouldn't have been able to stop me.
Well, no, Cliff Notes was probably the first example.
Yeah, I used Cliff Notes. I'll admit it.
Yeah.
It wasn't the right thing, but sometimes I couldn't read. I didn't did time on task, and we did a lot more homework back then than I think I see people doing now. So let me ask you this: does AI fundamentally break trust between students and educators? If the educators are using AI to build the classes and grade the papers, and the students are using AI to do the papers, what the hell's really going on there?
Well, and I'm going to go back. We were discussing the shall we say, the entitlement that a graduate rightfully probably should expect after they drop $100,000 and go through the process. But for those of you who are college students out there and you are now spending your tuition and it's time to come out and you're utilizing AI to help you out, when you look in the mirror, are you really entitled to what you think you are because you didn't do the learning experience? I mean, you've had your abilities were amplified. So there's one difference is that, going to college and at my time was a lot of books. You could do library work, but you had no ability to do searches for information. You had to, source it. We had to do a decimal system with the big closet, and everything was there with books with ladders, and it was an entirely different thing, and it was a real effort. I can say that my worst semester was I ridiculously took 21 credits at that time, and it was an ordeal of the first magnitude. That's not the case anymore, and you can obviously see where you would look to come up to cut corners, and Cliff's Notes was a classic example because quite candidly in the literature courses, which I found little purpose in anyway, why not? If I can get
you could go to the back of the Rolling Stone magazine and there was some company in California where they would write You could pay them to write the essay, or you could just buy one that was used at different universities.
Yeah, you had to have money for that one.
Well, I didn't, but I read the Rolling Stone,
saying,
and I could see it and fantasize.
Yeah. Well, that's true. There was some stuff on some matchbook covers. We talked about that the other day. I could build a plane for $15, but you know, there's I don't want to say it's morals, but there's a value shift though. I don't necessarily. I mean, when I used Cliff Notes the first time, I honestly thought that a bolt of lightning was going to come down and get me.
Yeah, but we made this a business because we said to people, we didn't say to people,
educators did, yeah,
come and learn for the sake of knowledge. Yeah. We said, come and do this, and here will be your outcome. It'll be a greater reward economically, financially, socially.
And if I dare go this far, being we're going to let me punch educators. I was astounded when my kids were in school at how quickly the guidance counselors would suggest, you know what, just drop the course and take something different next year. Hey, the old man just dropped 6 G's for this, and then now you're saying it's no big deal, do something different, and you could go through the metamorphosis of like 6 or 7 career opportunities. You know, and it was encouraged. The end user was encouraged with no concern whatsoever about who may have been bankrolling it, or for that matter, how they were going to pay back the money, because it just was, you know, it's too inconvenient to go. You made the wrong pathway. You know, you should do something different. You're not accountable for that. You know what? That's a problem. So you know, when we started to see this, it was because there was no commitment. If you really were immersed in the field that you wanted to be in, because you weren't just in college because it was the thing to do, you would have sucked up all that stuff firsthand and wanted it. I was that way with economics. I couldn't get enough of it. I couldn't. It was like an obsession, because once you start again, it's like, I think when one prof said, he said to me, economics is everything.
So
and he's right.
That was your passion.
That was it. Yep.
But you had to take a biology class.
I did.
Or a chemistry or something. You had to take a natural
lit
science
course.
Oh, you had to take several of those.
Yeah. Wasted time.
Maybe you had to take a foreign language.
We're going to get some comments on this one.
Wait a minute.
Okay.
Maybe you had to take a foreign language.
I did.
But what if you're... So wait. So your passion is economics. Yes. So maybe that's what you study. Maybe ChatGPT helps you with the other ones.
Okay. Maybe.
All right. And here's the argument. All right, people will say, "Oh, that's cheating. That's horrible." The ChatGPT. Mm-hmm. All right.
Mm-hmm.
But how many of those classes are busy work? How many of those classes did you take? Because I know how many I took, where it was a multiple choice exam anyway.
Yeah. Or just something written, which was going to be subjectively graded based upon the content. No, I don't argue. I don't argue that. You know, and at the same time too, we go back. Do we make education more difficult than it has to be? If we're actually, and you know, I go back, and we talked about this earlier. You know, I believe strongly in the trades. Certainly providing people with an opportunity to have jobs that they're going to be able to keep, and that's going to be another section. But
I can write the hell out of a paper.
Well, right.
But man, don't let me near plumbing.
Right. Well, there you go.
Unless you want your whole house flooded.
So you know, we forced people to have broad perspectives. I get that, although at the same time we suggest that the importance of literature is there, but we eliminated the shop class. Where if you had taken the shop class, you might have been able to, you know, build something to fix yourself. And there's a personal for me, there's a personal satisfaction. I'm a hands-on kind of guy. I got my flannel shirt.
But we convinced young people that was the work for. I don't know. You know, like my father. I know what my father would say, who did that work, and he wouldn't flatter himself because he didn't want his children to do it.
What's somebody's credentials, if we will, and you know that became. Certainly from an academic perspective, whether or not you're going to get the entrance permit to even play in the game, because if you don't have the credentials, obviously, you know, and that included probably 35 or 40% bullshit courses that, you know, you had to take just in order to be able to get them. So that was
you had to go through that to get to the class that you really want.
So you know, and
I'm an academic, and I'm telling you that felt that way.
And that is, you know, created demand. That was self-serving. I mean, if I'm going to be Joe the plumber, assuming that there was a doctorate in plumbing, which there may even be, but say there was. Does that make me a better plumber if I understood Plato, for instance? Well, I don't know. Does it? Probably not. It may have broadened my perspective. I suppose if I hadn't taken the lib arts course and the literature courses that I took when I was in college, I wouldn't have had as broad a spectrum of insight as I do now. But how much of that was also just based on creating demand to feed the industry?
Well, I mean, and that's one of the questions. So let me ask this: we got a whole bunch of people all in loan debt, right? And some of these degrees we know are going to be replaced. I don't see any college, including the one I run, streamlining that right now.
Well, I don't. I think,
and saying, you know what, this isn't going anywhere after artificial. This is one artificial intelligence is definitely. You're not even going to need a human in the loop with this degree.
All right, let's walk into it real deep then. Where does this come from? Curriculum is established generally by statute, either administered by a Department of Education at state level or overseen by the Federal Department of Education, which may ultimately get eliminated. So when we look at that, this has been ingrained in the system. These are, while I can sit here and say, yes, self-serving for educators to mandate these things, but in a lot of cases, I don't necessarily know that it was their choice. I go back 25 years. I came out against lawyers being in the legislature because they were creating legislation that flourished lawyers in the administration of the law and creating opportunities for litigation that was going to feed that industry. And in New Jersey, at least, in Article 3, there was a provision against that. It said that no one belonging to one branch could serve in the other two. Heaven forbid you want to talk about opening up a hornet's nest. But these are situations where, when I say that, because the lawyers, when they were in the legislature, were obviously creating laws that were going to enhance their learning capabilities. The same thing goes when you look at bureaucratic education in the DOE and also in county administrations. They are all educators, who have either retired or whatever the case may be, and they're still carrying that mantle. And they're not looking to take it where all of their friends are going to be out of work because they make a dramatic change. It's not going to make them popular when they go to the next convention. That's a fundamental problem. And it's in as much as we're looking at a lot of things that are going to go through a change, we have to start to make it more efficient and streamlined. Unless busy work is the purpose of the exercise.
When do we integrate? All right, so let me say this. All right, so we say you shouldn't use artificial intelligence while you're a student. Right? Yeah. All right. So I didn't, but hypothetical example. I study quantum physics. All right? Quantum mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
I study quantum science. I use quantum computing. I can get to answers to complex questions faster using the artificial intelligence than if I just use my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We know this. Who sets the standard, the benchmark for when I've learned enough that I'm now going to go to the machine? Well, why not go right away and think the unthought thought?
Let's go one step further. Is what you're learning of any value actually anyway?
Well, I don't know.
Given the fact that this may also be swallowed up by AI as it has an increased ability to generate its own code, anything is possible. So there's a dynamic going on there, and I go back. So, like with me, the great controversy was when Texas Instruments came out with the first handheld calculator, and heaven help you if you got caught with one.
Yeah, well, that was going to ruin everything, and it didn't.
And you could use your slide rule, but you couldn't use it. I think that one of the things, and I look at it from an aviation perspective, when I started flying many moons ago. You used an E6B calculator, and you would calculate. You could do your speed and distance and fuel consumption and crosswinds and everything. Were all could be done mechanically there, and you had to figure it out. You were based on point information that was provided to you. Now you've got up to the instant navigation that can actually take and plot everything for the pilot, where all he really has to do is push the button on the autopilot and then watch it land, and it's his job, if the motor stops, to do something about it. I think that generates complacency. And that's one of the areas where, if we're looking at it from an educational experience, over reliance on the technology without understanding the underlying principles is a problem. And it makes us where we're far less able to address the inconsistencies that are outside of the normal programming norms. That's a problem. And I see pilots, current generational pilots, who have become more and more dependent on the technology, are becoming, I think they have less, seat of their pants ability than they did when you learned it the other way. Because it's all right there for you. And unless your instructor forces you to do the basics, taking those basic instrument inputs and then translating them into bodily functions, as opposed to sitting there and plotting the information in. And I use that only as an example because that's where the basics are important. And if you don't learn those basics and you only looked at the end and it says, okay, well, at the end, you have to just get from point A to point B, and this is the way that you can do it with all the shortcuts. Well, all the shortcuts better work when you do it. And there's no depth to that. And that I think is one of the problems with this. And I don't think anyone out there is going to argue with the fact that there's a fundamental problem with the fact that we're delegating this stuff to AI when it's supposed to be a learning experience. Without getting into the question of what's the value of the lesson that you're getting, that's another chapter. But is it cheating? I guess let's get right down to it.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I guess it depends on your perspective. Right?
I don't know. Is it? I mean, if you're using the resources that are out there, and you're able to get to like point T instead of point B in an amount of time, I guess that's good. But if you don't know how you got to point T, that's a problem. If you can't count change because you don't know basic math, and unless the machine tells you that,
is there a should the work of the academics be to say, this is the amount of knowledge you have to know before you should use AI? I haven't heard anything like that. I've seen the most bizarre kind of behavior in this regard. No one is asking the question of, are we selling degree X when it's already obsolete? I don't see that in mass. I certainly don't see the accrediting agencies saying that. I see them protecting the status quo. I don't see anyone saying, I shouldn't use AI to develop my course material and make it better. I see people saying, you shouldn't use AI because it's cheating, right? Or it's, you're not going to learn as much if you want to take it to a positive, not calling someone a cheater, but saying this is detrimental to you long term because you won't be able to reason and think and use logic and these kinds of things. Even though everybody said you don't have to learn math anymore, even though that is, I know there are people out there who will tell me qualitative research is logic and reasoning. I would say based on the outcomes, there's no logic or reason to any of it. It's just perpetuation of what you think is right, that you're unable to test because you can't even do basic math anymore. So you have that phenomena, and then you have this other phenomena of everybody in higher ed trying to develop the AI program, academic program to sell. So don't use AI, but we're going to teach you AI. And nobody's saying, well, where's the human in the loop? And maybe we should be developing people. Because I guess there's so much mystery to it. It's just reactionary. And depending on where you're standing at any given time in relation to this AI, you might be having a different reaction.
So I want to just back up.
Bad for students, but good for teachers.
Well, okay. So, but
is that fair?
Let me just go back to a second because you mentioned you're using AI to enhance your lesson plan. Okay, that you could kind of look at that and say, okay, it's like it would be like me writing something and handing it to you and say, well, would you edit this and everything, and let's come up with something that we put out together. That's one thing. Here's the problem. How many of those professors are just like, I need an AI generated course syllabus. Point A, point B, got it. They didn't go through the actual physical mental process. So it's no longer a case of editing something. It's more a case of, pushing a button because you've decided in your job description that it is not a fundamental responsibility for you to do that. Maybe what you could do is you could use what AI does and then provide your insights to it along the road. And you know what? You could look at that and you could say maybe there is, some merit to that approach, from a point of efficiency. But then you better redefine the job description and you better redefine the pay, because quite candidly, in my opinion, that professor's not earning their salary.
And this is going to be the great dilemma, right? And it's not everybody. There are people doing that, and there are students who are going and doing all of their learning, and there are some that are using ChatGPT. How do you integrate this stuff? I think it's so far ahead of us that it'll probably take a generation. So these poor kids, they got locked up during COVID. They got educated with uncontrolled AI. And we have no idea what the future is, and we have no idea if degrees are. How can they believe in the system? Isn't it our responsibility as older people to say, whoa, wait a minute.
Well, so
slow this train down.
And here's where the problem comes in is that there were a series of contracts that were entered into based on a whole different bunch of parameters. So obligations that were established. I use as an example, back in the 70s, 80s, in the area where I lived in New Jersey, there was a sudden population boom. And the next thing was, we got to build schools. You got to build a school on every corner. 5 years later, they're closing them down because they don't have enough students to feed them, because in a process of either just...
Well, that's because you couldn't do math and actuarial stuff.
Well, there you go.
You can't add and subtract. You can't touch that logic.
Not going to touch that one either. But, it's so there's a dynamic there. Right now, we have a series of contractual obligations, labor agreements with professors that are in place that were designed,
building debt in most places,
designed upon parameters and efforts that did not account for AI. So the presumption was, if you're going to be a professor, you're going to spend 10 hours a week maybe developing your syllabus, working on lesson plans.
Happy to say all my degrees were earned before AI.
Well, there you go.
So, I can say with absolute certainty I had to do the readings.
But the job description, so basically what's happened is like, okay, yeah, I'm a professor, I'm making $200,000 a year, and man, this is a bonus. When I entered into this, I had to do this, and this, but now I just need to push a button. What a deal. I could take more vacation time. That's another problem, because the dynamic that provided them with the extra isn't getting translated to the student. It's just making their life better, which is fine. I get that. But is that an efficient use of resources? And at some point, it's probably going to fall onto the shoulders of the boards to actually take a look at this and say, are they going to change that?
Yeah, it's hard, though. Because, here's the idea.
It's a ratchet.
No, but it's even this. Look, I spent all this time on the course. Maybe I spent all this time on the course, right? Maybe I did spend a month putting this thing together.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, I did all the work already. Let me just run it through ChatGPT and get a little bit of feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And it's better. And I know it's
That's an enhancement, though. That's not a writing it.
Okay?
So, and I think...
Is that the answer? The students can enhance, the professors we can all enhance.
Well, hey, you know what? I could take a picture of this
but it can't be the
face and make myself look a lot better with an enhancement.
Well, I do that every time we put up the thumbnail.
There you go. It's a beautiful thing. But, so I think that enhancement, that's where you're using, basic skills, and then you're amplifying the capability of that. But you still have the basic skills. What happens when everything is generated and it's regurgitated to us, through a screen or whatever the case? We actually, if you take in terms of, how did education transform? The idea of distance learning really came into fruition during the pandemic.
Well, it was there, but it certainly took a step up.
Took a step up.
It went massive.
And, it's to a tremendous degree. If professional educators don't invest and continue to prove their worth, they're going to be replaced by that screen. And with the capabilities that we have of things being recorded, that message can be recorded and that they're not even needed anymore. And if the questions that are fielded, and I go back to my most recent experiences that I'm having with AI right now. So I take a canned course and I have a question. You know what? I don't need the professor for the question because I can ask AI to interpret something for me, and it can be done. If there's a particular part of it that I don't understand, I can ask and that can be addressed. The professor brings less and less to the table unless they start investing themselves personally.
And this is the interesting. I love going to school. I mean, I love it. I mean, to me, it's one of the great joys of my life, going and getting new knowledge, right? For me. But I certainly live with people who that is utter torture for them. And I can see it. It's not laziness. It's just not their passion, right? They're better off plumbing, electrical work, something, at least this point in their life.
And in that case,
but how many people do we shove into the system and say you need to go to college if you want to be successful, and it's not their passion? And we build all these colleges all over the place. So now we built them; they're expensive. We got to fill them.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's an economic model that has to be supported. But you know, I'm gonna talk about educational inflation because I think that's another thing.
Oh.
Everybody's
an A student now.
Wait a minute, no, but that's a lot of it. But you know, or you're just good, or satisfactory, or whatever the case may be, because we can't offend anybody because they don't have their act together. But for my parents, if you finished high school, or I should say my grandfather's generation, if you finished high school, you were something. You know, my great-grandfather, or I should say great-great-grandfather, I guess, who was in Eastern Europe in the 1800s, was one of the few people who was literate and was in quite a respected position just because he would be able to understand something that was on paper. And then it was like if you managed to get through primary school, you were a step above. You had learned how to write. Then it was high school. My time, it was getting a bachelor's, which I did. I excelled at it. I got my honors on my degree, but that was enough. You know, if you had a college degree, I went and knocked on a door, at least they wouldn't throw me out the door. Then it became where that in itself wasn't enough. Then you got to have a master's. Then you got to have a doctorate. Then, you know, it has that inflation of the degree. I get somewhat upset when, you know, a person of my age with my experiences with what was an adequate degree at the time that I was going through school is suddenly not credentialed because I don't have enough letters after my name. And you know, it's just a case because the life experiences play into it. You can be book smart and have no common sense whatsoever, which is, you know, the other part of it. And sometimes I think AI's got more common sense than a lot of humans do.
Well, let me say this, and I'm going to go. I'm going to try to end here, and I think this is it for me as a lifetime. You know, I've spent 30 years in education. I have multiple degrees. All right, this isn't bragging. It's just, you know, I'm stating these facts. When I advise young people, and I started out in the social sciences, and then I went over to unmanned systems, thanks to you, which I am grateful for. So I spent my life in this. I see what's coming. If I'm advising a young person and someone is asking me, the first thing I'm going to say is, pretty hard to predict what's coming down the road, you know, because I'm going to get caught up in a little bit of science fiction and everything else because that's all I know, right? I can't tell you what's going to happen tomorrow. But if I'm young right now, and here I go back to George S. Patton, because I always think he was smart in a lot of ways people don't realize. Young person came up to him and said, I want to be a tanker like you, cavalry tank. He said, don't do it. Don't do it. There's no future in it. Future's in the air. Go into the Air Force. You got so much promise. And that's what he told someone, basically. Mm-hmm. Go to the plains. So I'm going to take that as my model. If you think you're going to stop this stuff, you're not, right? I mean, I would love to. I'd love for millions of people to watch this and put a pause on this until we realize what the ripple effects are going to be. But we're not. We're going to jam this stuff forward, come hell or high water. In that regard, to be successful in the future, I have to have enough knowledge so that I'm the one who knows how to make the AI work for whatever the productivity is going to be. So I have to have enough basic knowledge and logical thinking and critical thinking to be able to ask the AI the right questions to get the right output. I have to understand what I want the output for, and I have to be able to check the AI for its veracity or its factualness. I don't think that's a word, but I'm going to use it.
It's another two guys word.
Well, I got a doctorate, so I'm allowed to make up new words. At least that's what they told me in graduate school.
There you go.
That for me. That's where I would tell a young person to go. Be the human that's indispensable with the AI simultaneously. Which means for me, at a certain point, there has to be a cutoff, and you have to start using it. Because you have to have experience with it to use it effectively.
Well, and the same thing happened with computer science, because in the beginning that wasn't taught, and then you had to get a computer. My granddaughter at some point, even though she had been pretty much raised without computers, at some point it was like you're going to become computer literate. I think to try to bring
you can in the institution though say, hey, everybody's learning AI over here. It's the next best thing. We're selling that, but you're not allowed to use it over here. You got to have a balance. So you got to use some common sense. So for most people, they're going to have to go back, even though they got degrees, and do some math. So they can get some logic.
In an effort to try to get us to suck people into our next segment, my closing thought is, if you decide that you find a passion, and preferably after you listen to the two guys' suggestions of future occupations, where we see some kind of future, if you decide on something that you want to do and you do your major on that, I would say, as far as like, can the Cliff Notes and the AI help you in the literature courses? If you're not a literature major, I would say probably I could look the other way and say, you know what, that makes sense.
You get me hate mail now, thanks.
You can concentrate on what your passion is. And if it's your passion, I would suggest you ditch the AI until you really fully understand to be able to ask the questions, just like Will talked about, that matter. And when you're able to engage at that level, then you become a worthy participant in the field that you're looking to be into. And I guess that basically says I've got a double standard.
It's impossible to figure out the right answer.
But we're going to help you out on occupations.
See you in the next episode.